So the word investigation, it kind of gives me a sort of a shield or housing kind of structure in which I can house my all the inconclusive or otherwise questionable thoughts which have begun but not ended yet. I personally name my methodology as RIPO. It's basically first I reflect, then I try to gather the input from what's already existing, then I try to process it, and then I try to give out an output. So these are the terms which are really a bit descriptive of what my personal interpretation of investigation is. There's a lot of faint ideas, there's a lot of doubt about to do or not to do, to be or not to be. There's a lot of doubt about what is the context, if it should be this or that, what is the utility, what is the agreement between the different entities involved. I'll further talk about all these things later. Sonic, the word was used 75 times, like basically sonic, sound and audio related words were using 75 times, and by zero-day luxuries on answer, I'll try to convey that there are zero-day errors in computing domains which can be exploited only once. So if I'm trying to answer some question, then I don't really go for an answer which has, because the same question might have been investigated by other people as well. So if I straight away go to their answer, then I might adopt their perspective. So first I try to reflect. I mean, I try to preserve myself by putting it all down and then really go about what has been done in that regard. So my investigation on sound, once I thought that, okay, I'll try to study what it is, it began, I didn't look for going to literature in the first go. It began with spreading out in space and time. Like I began with theoretically infinite context in space and time. So if we go back in time, when probably we think that it began from the Big Bang, and there's energy, there's an energy propagation, and then there are pressure waves as a form of energy propagation. Then there is a non-life perspective on sound. Like, but if there's no context of life involved, then the sound is also not there. It's just energy. And then I slowly narrowed down to a human perspective on sound. I did some comparative studies between the visual and the auditory. So I found that the reaction time in terms of reaction to a sonic stimulus is less than what is found to be in case of visual stimulus, and also the sensory memory of auditory sensory memory is greater than the visual sensory memory. So we find some edges that the sonic sensory modality has over visual sensory modality. Next component is narrative. So narrative is basically, like it was mentioned, because sound happens in time, and it's very closely linked to the concept of time itself, because the human phenomenon is, in my opinion, very much grounded in two concepts. One is space and other is time. It basically provides us with infinite stories of change from A to B. We can vary in infinite numbers, and these narratives are then distilled as cultural artifacts. I mean, the sounds which I have from in the exhibition, they are actually a distillation of the narratives which exist in that culture. So and since we have the capability to do a meta thinking, so this PDV stands for, like, P is the position, the narrative of position becomes the distance, the narrative of distance goes on to become the velocity, and the narrative of velocity goes on to become an acceleration. So that's how the nested thinking really is there. So with narrative we can think of narrative, so it becomes a narrative structure. And then within the concept of narrative there are two more concepts which I specifically investigate in the context of my work. One is dynamic narrative structure, and another is interactive narrative structures. So dynamic narrative structures is basically like this. Suppose we have a fan and it's making a constant sound. So we may say that the narrative of sound of the fan might be constant because it's not really changing over time. So I'm looking at how the acoustic spaces can be dynamic and be interactive. I'll be discussing that further. And future was used 14 times, and it's really a question mark, because most of the investigations are like what we try to find out is somehow linked to the future. There is a dynamic dialogue between us, because we don't really know if the future is there and it will be just unfolded, or by initiating our discussions on future, we will really initiate a sort of investigation in which there's a two-way interaction. I mean, by saying that this should happen in future, we actually sort of try to start making that a reality. So it really begins with a random thought. I mean, that's how I see it. So it's how I interpret future is like it's an uncharted territory in time, and which we have territories in space like geographical context, and which are really now occupied and have their borders. But if we talk of future, it's an uncharted territory in time, and control over this uncharted territory in time is basically what is sought for. I mean, in this sort of investigation, I'm also trying to impose, okay, this is what the future should sound like. So I'm seeking a control or something. Spaces, like I said, is another one of a very basic ground phenomenon, like a phenomenon in which the human phenomenon is grounded itself. So space and beings, space and their beings, and spaces and the behavior of their beings. I mean, this is a space. I mean, and the behavior of the beings inside it's like a joint agreement between what this space allows and what we want to do in this space. So basically, spaces of human being is what are the spaces in the future going to be like. So this is basically about that. So yeah, in our investigations on space, like we have space design practices which investigate how do we optimize or make it work in a better way. So we investigate on how a future space should look like, or how it should behave like. And my investigation is about how it should sound like. Human, we all know the context in life in biosphere. So I specifically cast it aside because then by acknowledging that, okay, human is something, then we can acknowledge something that is not human. So other context in life, and if we take life as a whole, then life, and then what is not life, so living and non-living. So that is basically to not leave anything out. I mean, that's how I progress. Being is a philosophical context, and human being was used 10 times. And in this title, Investigations on Sonic Narrative of Future Spaces of Human Being, human is used as an adjective to really refer to the way of being. So it's like very fuzzy interpretations. Now that was one set of lenses with which I could look over at a world. Now this is a second set of lenses through which I investigate. I mean, what am I working on? First is diversity. So I studied a lot of topics which could be argued that, okay, does this even relate to your work or does it not? So I look at diversity as a very critical concept, because I somehow see it to be linked with evolution. If we are feeding over diverse sort of foods, for example, and then we don't really miss out on some essential nutrients. And if we think about exposing ourselves to diverse kind of thoughts, then it gives us a better context to think in. So basically having a diverse sort of subjects to draw upon from. Then this is a very important component. What should design be? Because we have seen here a lot of investigations which are really excellent in their technical approach. I mean, they have achieved to do things that is like maybe very technically advanced, but what is the application, or what is the design perspective to it? So I personally looked over design as an integrated discipline. I mean, there's a lot of verticals happening. Like there is some advancements in, say, sound processing. There is some advancement in architecture, and then there might be some advancement in, say, biotechnology. And there are many verticals which are advancing in their own fields. But I see design as you stand over, like you have a zoomed out perspective and see how it could connect and then be applied in a humane sense. So then this is like continuing from the concept of diversity. I also looked at sustainability because sustainability in the sense of environmental and ecological sustainability, how it could also give a context to the investigation which I'm doing. This okay, agreement, distillation, and paradigm shift. So these are like sporadic concepts which are linked such that agreement was what I mentioned as this is a space. This is a space which is designed, and then the beings inside really have to be in an agreement with the space. So like we cannot exist in isolation. So we have to be in agreement with like other beings around. So that is a sporadic concept, and distillation is about how there are space design practices which are investigating optimization of spaces, where we have evolved from whatever we were to having say such kind of auditorium. So it's a distillation. I mean, whatever. And at paradigm shift, if I think that if any investigation has to look at creating a paradigm shift, then I look at progression as a branching tree. I mean, you have a trunk and then you have evolved things, and if you are investigating somewhere on a twig, say, so it really is dependent a lot on what has been done before. So if we talk of the environment in which a lot of the works in this symposium have been exhibited, so we have used Macs, we have used Pure Data, and then we have used iPads, we have used Apple tablets, and so that's an environment within which these sort of activities are happening. So so if we are really looking at if we really want to investigate a paradigm shift, then we might need to go little down and say, okay, let's leave them aside and let's see. So like that is another lens, so to say. And this axes and dimensions, if you read my paper, then I have mentioned a lot of axes in which actually sometimes we think that either this should be like either something, if we are investigating something, then there's a thinking of either this or that. That is one end of the axis, and the binary opposite of that might be neither this nor that. So it really sort of accumulates or covers all that is in between, and either this or that is lies on the end. So some axis on which I have tried to position the investigation which I did was like whether I'm doing something which interests me or whether it bothers me, whether is this something that I want to do or whether it should be done. So these are like two ends of the spectrum, and then there is somewhere in between where the work lies, and I try to position them somewhere in between. Then of course context in space, time, and biosphere. So context in time is like we can take an example of history. So we are interested in studying history. So paper is a media, and a dying language, the language which are going extinct, they are also a media. So why is paper still with us, and why languages are dying and we still like save them as a artifacts of some other period in time? So we are interested in dying languages because they are dying. I mean, it was a way in which activities were conducted some time back in time. So we are interested in preserving the dying languages as that. But if we look at paper, it has stayed with us all the way since it was invented through like thousands of years. So that gives us a context in time. So if I really am very critical of like the things that are happening in the context of our symposium, and I think whether this should have a value, because someone will in future will see what we are doing now as something like a characteristic thing of that period in time, like as dying language or as a paper. I mean paper as in it really managed to get that much of value so that it could sustain itself in time. So sustainability is like which should be in time. So that's what I'm talking about. Abstraction of present from the future. So if from future we abstract what are we doing today, and we try to look at it, we try to theoretically look at it, thinking from future, looking at present. So that gives a context in time. Context in space is basically geographical location into what culture we want to fit our work in, whether it's the west or the east. And also, a lot of my thinking draws upon analogs. So, yeah, analogs amongst narrative structures in. So, visual design practices have advanced much. We have very consolidated domains of knowledge which are in visual design. But if we, like, it's a visual that leads, and then from visual we began to think, okay, a lot of things are being done with visual. Why the sound is being left behind? So that's how, I mean, the thing gets started. If we draw an analog amongst narrative structures in architectural practices, so we are beginning to see spaces that are variable. Like, there are thoughts on spaces having variable physical dimensions, spaces that can interact with the beings inside, spaces that can be effective to the beings inside. I mean, the spaces such that they are sensitive to the beings that they are carrying. So that's the thought which is happening in advances or maybe practices in architecture. And if we look about on the narrative structures in cyberspaces, so basically this is where the cream of the minds is involved in their investigation. So in India, we have computer science as the #1 discipline. So cyberspaces is like the most forward, or maybe not, you can say that way, but a lot of thinking is into the cyberspace. So the advances or the type of narrative structures that have evolved in cyberspace might be relevant if we are trying to see what should be the narrative structure in the sonic environment. So if we for example take the notebook phenomenon, notebook as in a thing which you can put down the information on, and if we think of a notebook in a analog way, or really a paper notebook, or the notebook in the computer, so there is a lot of ease which has been given to us if we are trying to restructure the content in the cyberspace as compared to the content in the diary or the notebook in a physical form. So what I'm trying to say is that a general paradigm shift that is happening across the nature of narrative structures themselves. I mean, the restrictions on really moving the content around once it has been written onto the media. So if we have written something on paper, we cannot fiddle around with it. Like, we cannot rearrange the words. But if we have maintained a notebook in our, say, laptop, so we could rearrange the content. And so if you look at photography, it was, or film, basically previously it was physical reel based. Now it has come into the digital domain. So we can really tweak the narrative. That's what I'm trying to say. So, and also I had a wonderful opportunity to attend the wearable technology symposium here, and this was one thing which I was not looking at. Clothing is also going the same way. I mean, the presentations there was about clothing that is sensitive to the being, which can react to the being who is wearing it, which is dynamic and not really like this. It can exhibit lights, it can exhibit dynamic behavior, effective clothing, interactive clothing. So general paradigm shift in narrative structures across media. Now if we try to look at sonic narrative, so we can start to think, okay, if such sort of things are happening across other media, so we could maybe think on the lines of how do we actually have something similar or something that should evolve in conjunction or in connection with evolution in other narrative structures. So this got over. Now we come to the actual work, the installation. So what? Oh, I spoke too much. Okay, it's going to be over. So yeah.
Some time for questions also.
Okay. So okay, then I'll really get to what I wanted to do in this work. So if I want to imagine what should be the sonic narrative of future spaces of being, so I wanted the spaces to have a dynamic nature in the sense that this is really fixed in the sense that if this space has good acoustics, then it really stays that way. I mean, if we somehow try to manipulate it so that this space can exhibit a acoustic space of a large hall, then like we don't have such sort of freedom. So I was thinking, okay, we could investigate how the physical spaces could exhibit dynamic acoustic nature, and interactivity would basically be how how we as an inhabitant of that space can have a participation in what is heard. So in my installation, we could create a personal mix, so that was the participation of the being in creation of that space, and it was dynamic because it could change natures basically. So, and there were other sensitive issues that I thought of in the context of this work. Basically, we are looking at a continuous sonic bombardment, and that's what Rennick said to me, that you should try being in such sort of space and then see if that actually makes you go crazy. I mean, what we are looking at is a continuous intervention of sonic information, so that was a sensitive issue. If we compare it to visual media, like it has advanced so much to basically carry a lot of information into our spaces and then form our perception, I mean form the way we perceive things. Yeah, the installation that I did back there in college was done live, in the sense that what I was investigating is we have physical boundaries that really restrict the movement, but they do not restrict the sound. So the sound from outside could come in inside, and the user could tweak with the loudness, relative loudness of what sound he wants from, say, this direction, and then he could add little bits of effects which could manipulate space perception little bits. I mean, if there were birds chirping, and if you added a little bit of reverb, so that it kind of made you feel like, okay, this space might be a little bit large or spacious. And here it was the similar thing, but we had like an inventory of sounds where we could select, I mean, or create a personal mix. So there are like other things which I could just go on to talk about, but I think it should be fine now. I mean, it's like the real content is like this much, and other things are like beating around the bush. So I think we could conclude.